The views, opinions, and experiences of the hosts and guests of this podcast are their own. They do not reflect those of their employers, educational institutions, or affiliated organizations mentioned. This content is intended for educational and informational purposes designed to foster thoughtful discussion on topics related to engineering, education, and professional development.
Why am I putting myself through this? It's hard. I have to do something different. And I said, great, I think I'll do that too. And that's how I chose my major. I became passionate about making systems better for the people that work within them. Folks have a perception of what an engineer looks like, and I did not match that perception. It's like I really loved that because I saw connections forming. These folks are going into college with friends, and that's so exciting and empowering. It was cool to do both sides of things and be able to support students in different ways. I don't care if a student becomes an engineer. I care that if a student wants to become an engineer, they have the resources and support that they need to make their goals happen.
Welcome back to the Engaging Classroom.
Making it work.
I really like the way you kind of phrased that earlier is, and if I misphrase it, please feel free to correct me. The idea that you found that harmonious passion is better or a better driver, it makes people more happy, and your goal was to make sure that students with that harmonious passion felt that support that they needed to be successful.
Yeah.
And it sounded like even when you were at Baylor, kind of in the role of like that mentor, you kind of embodied that even before your thesis was written, like doing the Legos for ladies, doing that mentorship that's not necessarily about what's your class. It's, hey, let's go get ice cream and talk about how you are as a person. That's really awesome because you mentioned kind of your experience and kind of being a bit of an introvert and really needing to seek out that woman friend, that woman friend in engineering to get that support yourself.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think you summed that up nicely.
So what was your doctorate in at Virginia Tech?
It's in engineering education.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so it's its own thing, not discipline specific. Just people enter engineering education PhD programs for lots of reasons. Some of my cohort mates want to teach a certain concept really well, and that's awesome.
Yeah.
I never wanted to teach. I don't teach. I've been encouraged to teach, but
What would keep you from teaching?
So like what would keep you from teaching? I think it's so interesting. You're saying I want to go into engineering education and then never teach.
Yeah, no, it is interesting. Not a lot of people do that. But because of the student support and kind of behind the scenes work that I'd been doing, that's more why I entered. I wanted to know how to support students better in the roles that I had experienced before. Doing the PhD opened my eyes to lots of other ways to do that. But I like I said, I don't necessarily care that a student becomes an engineer. So I don't want to teach them statics. I don't want to teach them the content exactly. I want them to be successful in whatever it is that they're doing. And so I took the approach of how can we make sure, regardless of what stage students are at in their education or career, how do we prepare them to do the best that they can do. And that, I think, can come from a classroom, but I have a lot of opportunities outside of the classroom to feed into that too.
I mean, what this sounds like to me is that it's what drove me kind of out of teaching. And I'm not a teacher, but I don't think I'm really ever truly out of teaching. I mean, you're certainly doing the job of someone who is in education. You're teaching people things all the time. You just don't want to be.
I don't want to be in a lecture hall in front of a bunch of people. Yeah.
Yeah, I completely get that.
But it also sounds like, I mean, that's not the role you want to fill.
Right.
That's right.
It sounds like to me your interest is in the enablement of people to follow their dream, to follow their harmonious passion.
Yes, exactly.
So many of us are thinking about our future, like where I want to go in the future. Maybe you were always like this, but was there a shift from like thinking of your future to thinking about the futures of others?
That's a great question. I feel like it came at Hokie Camp, where I'm like watching these students form connections, and I would get emotional because I'm like, these are potentially going to be lifelong friendships for these people, and I had a role in like helping cultivate that.
Yeah.
So it was a little bit selfish about my future of like, that is a feeling that I want to hold on to and help folks connect to each other around things that they're interested in. And if that thing happens to be engineering, then that's great, but it's more so about the making connections. I describe my job as connecting people, ideas, and resources, and that is what I do all day, every day.
That's so great.
And I love it.
So you left Baylor, you went back to Virginia Tech to study engineering education. And you mentioned that a lot of your focus was on enabling students to pursue what their passion was, to make sure that they had the resources that they needed to be successful in that passion. So how did your studies at Virginia Tech kind of evolve from that?
Yeah. So the engineering education PhD program at Virginia Tech is kind of separated into two parts. Take engineering courses, take social science courses.
Yeah.
And the first year of the program is really about teaching engineers how to think about social science and people and implications on people, which is, I think, pretty cool. I had already done that transition when I was at Baylor, or maybe arguably before that, because I've always thought about people more than the technical side of things.
Sure.
So the first year was like a survey of what are the big issues in engineering education and how do we read engineering education literature and that kind of thing. So that was kind of the foundation. And then we got to pick and choose from there on those two categories. Because I had a master's in higher education, I was able to bring in some credits for the social science side of things, which opened up more engineering side of things, which I ran away from the engineering and was not that excited about that, but it allowed me to explore some areas of engineering that I didn't know existed before. And so I mentioned that I did a simultaneous master's in industrial and systems engineering during the PhD.
Yeah.
So I was able to shape my coursework into thinking about organizational systems. So my master's is really focused on organizational systems, so off of the manufacturing floor, but did a lot of projects around how higher education works, how organizational change works in higher education, how systems have been built for students or not built for students in some cases. And so all of those courses that I took in ISE I brought them back into engineering education and kind of was looking at how systematically can we change things to help students achieve their goals.
What's an example? Because at a university, you would think all the systems are built for students.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm more so talking about when higher education started. When the first colleges opened their doors, they were for men. And so thinking about how access to education has evolved since then, that part came from my higher ed master's. But even looking at how more recently, like admissions cycles and recruiting work and where Virginia Tech is targeting their recruitment or where universities are targeting, it's going to affect who accesses the institution. And so I did some projects mapping out different factors that play into a student's ability to access college and like did systems mapping of all of that and tried to change variables and see what would help and all of that kind of stuff. So that's where I was coming from.
So what did you find?
There are a lot of complicated things that matter. Having a mentor is hugely important because the curriculum is really complex in engineering, and navigating that is one barrier to student success. All sorts of things about students' identities, where they are from, what their socioeconomic status is, what their parents did, whether their parents went to college, all of these many, many, many other factors that play into it. I did not capture all of them by any means in my model, but I was mostly playing with what is the impact of having a mentor or somebody who you look at and like know that they're an engineer on a student's likelihood of accessing an engineering education.
So what matters in a mentor?
Right.
I think for accessing college, somebody who understands what college is and how it works. I worked with a lot of first-generation college students, and there are a lot of terms that universities use that are not intuitive, a lot of acronyms, and even things that are as simple as that for a student who has never heard of office hours before, like all of this terminology is new.
Yeah.
So thinking through like those things from the lens of if I didn't have a parent who went to college, like how would I have learned that? So some of those systems, which also ties back into orientation and how we are orienting students to the university. So I did some looking at how orientation is structured, not university-wide, but within engineering, and how we're equipping students to be successful. I did some research projects around that too in graduate education, which was pretty cool because that's another layer of things. Graduate students don't usually get the full orientation experience that undergraduates do. And so especially for international students or folks who are the first in their family to do a graduate degree, how are they accessing information? So that was a focal point of some of my research and systems program that tied in nicely with engineering education and fixing systems. And
That's so cool.
It is. It really is.
I was a first generation college student. So I never signed up for dorms my freshman year because no one told me I was supposed to.
Oh,
Right.
wow.
So I called up the school 2 weeks before I was starting and was fortunate enough that they had an opening at the dorm,
wow.
or else I wouldn't have had a place to sleep during my freshman year.
Kind of essential to being a college student.
Yeah, I've
Maslow's
heard.
hierarchy
Well,
of needs.
so, I mean, there are music students who would disagree, who would say that you could just sleep in the practice room and you'd be perfectly fine.
So what is the title of your dissertation?
The Dynamics of Belonging Among Women in Engineering. And I made up that title before I finished writing it. But it was looking at the interplay of thinking about the university as a system. And based on my experience and the experiences of the women I worked with at Baylor who said, hey, I feel like I really have this strong affinity for my university, but I'm not feeling the same sense of belonging in my classroom, that I kind of took a systems level approach at looking at how can those things work together? Is this an experience that's shared by other women in engineering programs? What factors are contributing to these feelings? And what do we do about it?
Yeah, that is quite a lot, especially in today's climate.
That's true.
What did your research find for that dissertation?
Yeah, my research found that my experience is mirrored across a lot of women's experiences. I did a quantitative study, sent out a survey to Virginia Tech undergraduate engineering women and Baylor undergraduate engineering women, and I did that intentionally because I understand the contexts of both and the differences between the two universities, so I was able to do some comparison across institution types. I asked the same set of questions twice, and they were all about how students perceive their sense of belonging. And the first time, I had them answer from the lens of, think about your university. Do you feel like you belong? And they were more intentional questions than that, but that was the gist. And then now think about your status as an engineering student. When you walk into your engineering classes, do you feel like you belong? And overwhelmingly, with statistical significance and effect size and all the things that matter, I found that it was not just me that was experiencing these things.
So it is statistically common.
A phenomenon, yes.
Yep, that women have the same kinds of difficulties in STEM, in engineering specifically, that you experienced at both
Yep.
universities. And that it's not necessarily just at those two universities.
Right.
Have you found it in other universities? Have you had the ability or the opportunity to do further research at other schools?
Not on this exact topic, but I have had the opportunity to share it at conferences, and I've had, which was surprising to me, lines of people wanting to talk to me about their experiences, and a lot of them were women who said, I didn't know someone was studying this, and this was exactly what I felt, and I didn't understand that it was not just me who was experiencing it. So it has led to a lot of conversations with a lot of people from very different parts of the country, which is pretty cool and a small step towards helping fix things.
So, what did your research find that these students were feeling?
That students tended to feel a great sense of belonging within their institution and not within engineering. And both of these schools that I was surveying are what my PhD advisor calls rah-rah schools, like great school spirit, alumni engagement. People are very proud to go to these schools. And so that was an interesting cultural thing, and I would be curious if replicated at a smaller school, if that would show up in the same way. But basically found that belonging at the institution, not within engineering, or at least levels were higher outside of engineering, which is
Okay.
interesting because engineering is a part of the university, but it feels separate
Yeah.
when you're in the classes. And then I looked at factors that contribute to that. So I had an open-ended part of the survey that asked specific questions of what factors contributed to your sense of belonging in engineering, and then the same question outside of engineering, and looked at some of those responses to see differences. Overwhelmingly, involvement in student organizations is a big contributor to belonging, both within and outside of engineering, and it didn't necessarily matter if that involvement was in engineering or not. Just involvement generally in finding connections and people to study with makes a huge difference. And then things that detracted from belonging. This was done during COVID, so COVID was a big one. These people were living in dorms and not able to do the normal program stuff. So that was a little caveat, limitation for sure. But also just similar to some of the examples that I've shared, there were two themes around men being problems that I
Really?
found. One of them was I titled just men, and that is people being jerks just because, or faculty members not taking women seriously. But there was a different category too that was men underestimating I don't have the word for it, but like men underestimating me basically and thinking that because I am a girl, I can't do engineering. So those both were distinct. It's like on one hand, treating people differently, but on the other hand, just not believing that women can do this work.
Did you find that that it was across all age ranges of men in the way that they treated women? Or is it leaning more towards older men or younger men, or did it matter?
There were a lot of examples across the board. Some of them were about male faculty members, and like they never call on girls, or they only call on girls and single them out. I've had experiences where faculty members who were men have talked over the girls in the class when they would ask questions. A specific faculty member did that. There were only 3 girls in the class, and anytime any of us would raise a question, we'd start talking while we were still asking the question, but didn't do that with the guys. Things like that I saw come up in my study too, and not being listened to, that came up a lot, or taken seriously. People assume that because I'm a woman, I can't do technical things. That came up in my study. Faculty also, just like generally, not just men, was another category of challenge for the girls that I surveyed. And they were saying classes aren't structured in a way that work for me or play to my interests. All of the examples of engineers in problems are men. And that's something really common, not just in higher ed and college engineering classes, but like in children's literature. Examples of engineers are often men, or scientists are men. And even language like saying, oh, I met a female engineer. You wouldn't say that about a man who was an engineer. So examples like that came up too.
Instead of just saying
an engineer, exactly.
Right.
You know, it reminds me of Dexter's Lab, the cartoon when we were growing up. You had Dexter, who was a guy and brilliant, and then you had Dee Dee, his sister, who would come and break everything and mess everything up. And for a lot of kids, that was the example engineer in cartoon media.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I think it does go
Yeah.
more broad than just it's in our society. It's in our culture.
Yeah.
So I'm interested, did you ever encounter women or interview women who had left engineering and the reasons they had left engineering?
That was actually my first proposed dissertation topic. I wanted to study why women left engineering. And my committee said, that's not what you care about. You care that students are supported. And basically they were telling me, you don't care why people leave. You care about what's keeping them there. And so sense of belonging plays into what's keeping them there. So no, I have not looked into that very much. I've talked to a lot of people who have left engineering, and for various reasons, whether it wasn't getting the support that they need or the classes are too hard and not succeeding in them. But I haven't. It's not my main area.
I really like the way that your advisors said, like, what keeps the students in the program.
It was scary in the dissertation proposal to be told, no, that's not what you're interested in, because it's an exam. And they said no. But then it did help shape my dissertation into something much better than it would have been otherwise.
Not only that, it's like you had this idea. They're like, no. You personally do not think
yes,
this.
but they were right. Yeah.
But they were right, right? So, yeah, no, that's a really interesting experience. That's
Oh, that would be so tough. That would be so hard for me to go into something and be like, I think this, and be told, no, you don't.
It was,
No, you don't.
let
No,
me
you don't.
backtrack. It was before the proposal. I don't know if you know the dissertation milestones, but it was before that. It was
We
still
don't.
an exam, but
Yeah. More importantly, they may not.
yeah.
that's true.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
Well, so how in all of this, you're now done. You've finished your PhD. I don't know, is it that the dissertation is accepted or whatever?
Yes.
You're published.
On the internet.
It's on the internet. People can find
They
it.
can. It's 267 pages long, so you don't need to go find it.
They might. Regardless, it's out there. You're published. You've earned your PhD. You've done your postdoc work, and now you are full on working as a researcher for Virginia Tech. How has this experience of you getting into engineering, you going to Baylor, you coming back into engineering education, how has it shaped your career? And early as it is,
Yeah.
it is still probably shaping it.
Yeah. I've become a much better networker than I used to be. And I think that's really important because, like I said, I see my role as connecting people, ideas, and resources. And so when I started my postdoc position, which was all about creating connections with local school systems, most of my days were spent like getting coffee with people and trying to understand where they were coming from, which I love. And from there to be able to like take those conversations and look at a bigger system of how education works in Southwest Virginia. I think the systems thinking training definitely prepared me for that, but also just knowing and understanding some of the intricacies of people's experiences in education certainly helped prime me for those conversations. And so in my postdoc work, I went and toured a bunch of school systems and talked to teachers and said, what's working for you, what's not? And I was doing that to help where needed folks integrate engineering into their classrooms. So asking about their motivations for why do you want to do that? What is stopping you from doing that right now? And often it's lack of resources or nobody has taught me how to teach engineering. And so I've been able to build some cool programs for teacher professional development around the actual needs of educators in our region. And I think that prior to doing any of this work, like I would have just been guessing, but now it's like I know what kinds of questions to ask based on the experiences people have shared with me that they've had, and I know how to take an idea and turn it, like think strategically through it to turn it into an educational experience that is meaningful and will have some kind of good impact, hopefully.
What are some of those programs that you've gone into, that you've started?
Yeah, the first one, so connections that the research team had with local school systems pre-COVID, that kind of people shifted in and out of roles during COVID. And when we finally emerged from the pandemic, those relationships weren't as strong as they used to be. So I got brought on as a postdoc to rebuild some of those connections with school systems so that we could help with the integration of engineering and help give students a pathway to become an engineer if they wanted to. And so the way that I did that was through teacher professional development. So that's why going around to all the school systems and talking to people, created a 2-day workshop for regional educators who did not teach anything related to engineering to come to Virginia Tech's campus, see the space that's there, and also hear from people who can teach engineering and learn strategies. And we've helped them build curriculum and also one-off kind of fun activities that they can take to put in their classrooms. A really unique part of the program that I've not seen very much in professional development is we continue to work with those teachers for a year. So it's a cohort that comes in, does this workshop, and then are able to ask for resources throughout the year. So I've gone to schools and led activities and hosted field trips for teachers to bring their students to campus at Virginia Tech and show them the engineering labs and hopefully inspire some young minds to be engineers someday, which is really special and neat. And I went to Riverside and did the engineering program, but I didn't go on any of the field trips where we were touring universities. So my choice to tour Virginia Tech really was arbitrary, but these students at least have a starting point to compare things to, which is pretty cool.
That's so cool. So how did those teachers previous or prior to the training, how did they feel about engineering and teaching engineering?
Yeah. I think a really cool part of my role was I was only working with teachers who were excited about engineering.
Okay.
And some of that excitement came from conversations I had with them where I was like, well, manufacturing is a really big industry in this region. And a lot of rural students, there's research around this, want to stay in their region.
Yeah.
And so how do we connect those students with opportunities that exist around them?
Mm-hmm.
And that happens to be very easy to do in manufacturing, whether or not a kid wants to go to college. But how talking to the teachers, I think, got them more excited. And so then they were excited to eat up whatever we gave them at the workshop. And we framed everything around systems thinking. Everything is a part of a system. And so how can you connect art or Spanish or whatever it is that the teacher was teaching with engineering concepts and help your students make those connections? That was exciting to them.
As someone who didn't feel like they had all the resources that they needed, I was constantly just making things, bringing it on my own, just Googling as much as I could, trying to find what resources could I use for various projects. And what the two of you do with your careers now is provide an opportunity for the teachers to create those resources or an opportunity to find, here's what other people have done, this is what works. There's so many people that need that kind of help.
Well, and it's difficult too, right? Because so many teachers enter into education because they want to help, right? They have those rose-tinted glasses on. They are going to change the world. They're going to bring all these experiences to their students, and then they quickly run into so many issues. And I say they lose those rose-tinted glasses. They don't have the resources. They have students who don't have the support at home, and that comes out as behavioral issues, or that comes out as academic issues. So they're fighting against all of these problems that their students face, that they face as a teacher with the resources. And one of the things that I say oftentimes in the professional development is, so you have these experiences, you see all of these problems that your students face. But what I want you to do is I want you to put those rose-tinted glasses back on, because now that you have those experiences, how can you still help?
Yeah.
And this is an opportunity, if we can bring this to students with the experience that you have now. How could you make that difference that you were trying to make when you first started?
Yep.
Yeah.
So anyway, so you have the opportunity to work with teachers who are excited about bringing education to their students. And it also sounds like you have the opportunity to go into the classroom and work with those students as well, kind of lead some of those activities. So what's the response from the students that you work with?
They're pretty excited about it.
Yeah.
I've done more of the bringing students to Virginia Tech's campus, but I take them to cool labs that are doing neat things, and they get to see how helmets are tested that are used in the NFL. And like, that's so exciting, but they may never have thought, oh, an engineer has a role in designing that. Like, that's so cool. So to be able to see them light up and want to take little pictures with the helmets, it's really fun. But going into the schools too, we've done, based on that specific lab experience, just like, how would you design a helmet? And that was one of my favorite activities that we did, because then we brought those students to campus to the helmet lab, and they were like, this is how you actually could do it someday. So that's overwhelmingly very positive reaction. And I've had a couple students come up to me after and be like, oh, how do I learn more? And that's what it's all about.
That's so cool.
It's so exciting.
Yeah, that feels so good.
Yeah.
What are the key takeaways from all of this? What are the things? First off, what would you say to someone who is aspiring to be in engineering, who identifies as a woman, that you've taken from your career, from your time in engineering education? What would you tell them? What advice would you give them?
It might be uncomfortable and it might take time, but find the people who will support you. If someone's doing something really exciting, ask them about it. That's how I've made a lot of my connections. Bring others up along with you. I think that's something we did not talk about, but I've worked with some women who are really good at what they do and are not the best at mentoring others and bringing them up alongside them. So do that as much as you can. If you make a friend who's a girl, just talk her up. And that doesn't just go for women either, but anyone, always, and not just in engineering. Believe in yourself and you can do it. But there are supports out there that you can find if you have the right people in your corner. And so find the right people.
Awesome.
Awesome.
What would you say? I mean, we've just heard a great tale, a great story, really,
Yeah.
of someone who's gone through the things that you and I have seen, I think, from a distance. We haven't experienced them ourselves, but we've definitely seen it from a distance. What are your takeaways?
You know, I think my big takeaway is it goes back to what you were saying earlier, kind of the power of mentorship and the power of having somebody who is a role model who does provide that support. Where whether or not it is a teacher in a classroom who is bringing their students to Virginia Tech to learn about football helmets or learn about engineering, to open the students' eyes, to say to them, no, you can do this, kind of shield them from those stereotypes that say they don't belong in this field, and instead open the door to the field and say, no, if you're interested, if you're excited, you can do this. And then to find those connections, those people who are going to keep those doors open, but also walk through those doors with you. That sounds so important to making you feel empowered, included, and to make sure that that passion that you have doesn't fizzle out simply because you can't find that community of people who are there that believe in you.
I have had a very privileged life, and part of that privilege has allowed for me at a young enough age, about 12, to find out what it was like from my mom. To be in a world that is dominated by people not like her. And I got to spend an entire summer with just her while she was going through some medical treatments to help with breast cancer. And at that time, I didn't understand what it was like for women. And she was in computing. She was what we would probably consider a computer scientist now. And that changed my life at that point. And I started to try and look at what is it that people around me are experiencing that's different from me. And I think prior to that, I didn't. And I, 12 years old, grew up very quickly that summer with that mentality. And I see in my own experiences with students that they don't need me to open the door for them. They need me to show where that door is. They need me to show how you open a door. And they need me to be in their corner when they're struggling with going through the door. And I hope that anybody who looks like this, who is like me, can help anyone else around them. It's one of the things I try to do with my TAs all the time. It's why we train them the way that we do, so that they go into their classrooms and they know that these students are the ones I'm here for. And I hope that that's something that people in education go away with. When you go into education, you're not here for the money. You're here to make the next generation of people better. Let's make this world a place that is better than how we were given. And I hope work like what you've done in your research and your dissertation gets promoted more.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This is a great step towards that.
I can't agree more.
Yeah.
I will
think it
say
is.
too, a lot of my biggest cheerleaders are men. So I don't want any of this to be construed as
No.
men are a problem. But I do think that's an important, people like you two, giving a platform to those who don't usually get to be in front of folks talking is a huge step in the right
It's the only way
direction.
progress happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we should say thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you
coming
so
out
much.
and talking with us.
Thank you both.
This has been a lot of fun. So I'm excited to see where this goes.
Mhm.
Yeah. And thank you to all of you for being here with us.
Yeah.
We'll see you next time.
And you mentioned like it's not your job to open the door, but it's your job to help people walk through it or help them feel like they belong. And I think for like a K-12 teacher, that's the job, right? Your job is to be there to say like, no, that's the right door. Like that, if that's the door you want to walk through, then let me help you through it. And I think that's really important.
I do too. Before we leave, or before we finish recording, did you stop?
No, I haven't stopped yet.
Stop.
You're gonna hate my camera, by the way, because the whole time I'm looking like this.
No.
And like, it's gonna be the side.